Hi, welcome to another episode of the Postscript, Living Faith Bible Institute's weekly podcast and YouTube series, where we have conversations with pastors and professors from LFBI about topics ranging from their life in ministry to theology, and all of it's intended to edify you and strengthen you. And so we're hoping that it does that. This week, we are with my dear friend, Pastor Alan Shelby, and we're going to be having a conversation about the church and the church's role in politics. So it's already, just from right out the gate, we're being controversial. So you know how politics are. So here we are. We're going to have this conversation. And my very first question to you, Pastor, is how did evangelical Christianity come to a place where they were synonymous with, or at least the bulk of it, synonymous with republicanism? So that's a big question. But give us the history and how you think we got to a place where we were tied so closely and bound so closely to the Republican Party. What happened?
Well, that is a good question, because I would say it was not so from the beginning, meaning the beginning of the evangelical movement in America. So George Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards. Now, maybe there was some sort of political alliance in the sense that it was the Great Awakening that provided the spiritual impetus of the American Revolution. So perhaps there was some tie together in that way. It is kind of an odd thing that it should be like that, because America ostensibly being founded on the idea of a separation of church and state. However, I think just like the ancient Roman Republic, that did not mean a separation of God and state. Mm-hmm. So we use the word God all the time, and God is invoked at most of the political functions that we do. Mm-hmm. And that's no different than it was in first century time. So, however, evangelical wing of Christendom does seem to have a propensity for one party over another. Right. Now, I could say I'm a Republican and alienate 20 to 30%. I could say I'm a Democrat and alienate 60 to 70%.
Yeah, sure.
But that doesn't mean, therefore, that I'm a libertarian or something like that. Mm-hmm. I think what I would say it means is that this world is not our home, and we're always looking for a king. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, even many Christians. So how did we end up in the spot that we're in? We're still looking for a king, just like ancient Israel was, mm-hmm. when they came to Samuel and said, look, you're getting old, and your sons don't follow in your ways. So give us a king like all the other nations. Mm-hmm. I believe that we've said that even on all the way back to the early fundamentalists, because they were as politically aligned in many respects as we are today. Mm. So here's one of the things I think is sad. Billy Sunday, great evangelist, prior to Billy Graham. So right. Billy Sunday preached, and very popular, and who knows how many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands even of people came to Christ through his preaching. Mm-hmm. But if you go on YouTube, there's exactly one video of Billy Sunday, and he doesn't say one word about the gospel.
Man,
it is all against, quote, the liquor crowd,
right?
Because it was all about prohibition. Mm-hmm. And that is the only legacy and heritage of Billy Sunday that is out there on YouTube. And that's too much. When it transcends the gospel, then it's too much.
Yeah. So what does that tell us in terms of how politics have gotten in the way? I mean, so you think about an evangelist like Billy Graham, whose sole desire in life was to see people converted. In fact, your own testimony is by the influence of Billy Graham, and yet he made famous the association of the evangelical relationship with politicians, and he spent so much of his time in the White House, and later he came to a place decades later when he saw that it really didn't have much influence, and that that the Christian lobby was an interference. He said he regretted it. He came to a place of regret that he had spent so much time wooing presidents when all the while he should have been focusing more attention than he already was on the gospel. What does that tell us?
Yeah, and I think in his defense at the time, he would have said he was America's pastor, and he had a good relationship with presidents since Harry Truman. So both Republican and Democrat. So he would be in the offices of the Democratic presidents as well as the Republican presidents. But I think it was especially those, if you read any of Calvin's commentaries, there's a difference between Calvin and Calvinists. And even John Calvin denies Calvinism when he gets to, 1 John, and it talks about Christ dying for the sins of the world. Calvin is not a Calvinist there. And some of the problem isn't Calvin, it's Calvinists. And we always tend to take the people we follow, and there's no truer believer than a convert, and they go out and they're over the top with it. So Billy Graham was one thing, which did open a door, but then you had Jerry Falwell, and that became a total another thing.
Yeah.
Because the idea was that if you could extrapolate from the Bible certain socially conservative positions, and those socially conservative positions you get out of the Bible are mirrored by a certain political party, then you should support only that party. Otherwise, you are not being a good Christian.
Right.
Okay, so there's this echo effect of extrapolating one thing out, and then it kind of echoes back in a different way. So I've gone from there's certain things the Bible affirms, and we live in a free country, so vote your conscience.
Sure.
But then going from that to, well, only this party in their platform, really, they're the only ones that support the majority of those things. And then if I don't vote for them, I'm not spiritual, or I'm a bad Christian in some way. So now we have entwined politics with our Christianity and our evangelical Christianity. And we tend to entwine patriotism with our prophecy. And that makes us off on both. And it's a shame.
Explain that a little bit, the way that we've intertwined prophecy and patriotism. And I think I know where you're going, but our listeners might not understand that.
So if I do that, let's say from my viewpoint of Daniel's explanation of Nebuchadnezzar's image in Daniel chapter 2.
Yeah.
And so it has the, head of gold, and that's Nebuchadnezzar, and the arms of silver, and that's Medo-Persian Empire, and the thighs of brass, and that's Alexander, and his 4 generals that kind of inherit the earth after that. And then it breaks into 2 legs. And our prophetic position for so many decades in Baptisthood is that those 2 legs were the Eastern Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire. And that is, I'll say that is an interpretation colored by our patriotism. Because if the question is, where's America in Bible prophecy? We don't want to accept the idea that we could kind of actually end up being all over the, so all over the place it wasn't needed to be mentioned, or it was mentioned and we're refusing to see it. So I will say one leg is, the Roman Empire, ancient Roman Empire, republic converting into an empire with the first emperor in the 1st century at the first coming of Christ. And the second leg is our Neo-Roman American Empire, which is also has all the same faults, flaws, and mechanisms and the same type of cultural scenario happening where it can be co-opted by the person who will be the next emperor.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got 2 legs and 2 feet, and there's a parallel between the two things. If you will drain your view of Bible prophecy of all of the patriotic, and I'm a patriot.
Mm-hmm.
America's land, we fight for freedom and democracy.
Yeah, we love America.
And a capitalist, okay, there are good things about our system when extremes are shied away from.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I can't let my patriotism blind me to what God is actually doing.
Mm-hmm.
So 3 types of empires in history, empires of conquest, Assyria, Babylon, Russia, empires of commerce, Greek, British, and only 2 empires of trust. The Roman Empire, which grew because they were all about security,
mm-hmm.
and expanding their security horizons in order to have peace for trade.
Yeah. They're very diplomatic in that regard.
America.
Mm-hmm.
So ever since the Bretton Woods Accords in 1944, we've had a one world currency. It's called the dollar.
Right.
The euro has no IMF. There's no IMF of the euro. So it won't be in the Chinese. It's the dollar. We have a one world currency because there's an IMF of the dollar.
Mm-hmm.
It's dollar denominated. So we've got that. Ever since World War I, every boot came back. But when we had to go back within 25 years and turn that place out again, no. We have bases in however many countries of the world Rand Paul said it was. We've got we've got bases there.
Yeah.
Of one size or another. And that's exactly what the Roman Empire did. They'd set out an outpost. Anybody could knock that off, but you knew when you did, you called down a Roman legion on your head. So you didn't do that.
Yeah.
And so we've done the same thing, and we've kind of been the director of things in the world. And that's good when you have benevolent leaders with the checks and balances in place.
Sure.
And I think the orbit of our politics continues to spin in such a way that, those balances are thrown off, and, we'll see what happens. But at the bottom line, there's no political party that is my savior.
Right.
Government will not be my Messiah.
Right.
This world is not my home. What I do is I pray for all the leaders, so that we can have quietness and peace.
Yeah, live peaceably.
Because that's how the gospel is going to go forth.
So why all the dogmatism? So they invented Facebook, and so Christians as well as everyone else has the opportunity to brand themselves, publicize their identifiers. This is the person that I'm presenting to you. This is the person that I want you to know that I am. And so much of that dialogue, that dialectic from Christians in particular is not necessarily about the gospel, but what they perceive to be their Christian political platform. And again, I don't think you would suggest that Christian morality is ever wrong, whether it's legislated or not. But what I'm asking is, why is it that Christians are so bent on the idea that there's some form of salvation in having your political party in control and in power?
Well, I think whenever you succumb to the modern malady of not walking in the Spirit and not being a good Berean,
mm-hmm.
so when you give up biblical authority and you are not doing discipleship,
mm-hmm.
then you are open. And I think we've even gotten past, haven't we, as evagelicals? So I'm not speaking personally here,
mm-hmm.
or even for you and I.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about evangelicaldom.
Sure.
Haven't we even got past the point of caring whether or not our candidate personally fits biblical moral framework.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we used to criticize the other side because it didn't seem to us that their candidates were the paragon of virtue, and
Right.
therefore vote for ours. You can see, obviously, we got it right.
Right.
And
we've abandoned that.
I think we kind of got over that.
Yeah.
And there are other issues, and I think and the problem is this: I can see saying that keep your eye on Israel,
Mm-hmm.
because what God is doing right now, He's going to pick a candidate, and He's going to allow things to go forth that are going to allow a certain scenario and do a certain thing where Israel is concerned. So I can see that.
Mm-hmm.
But what we do is we build a theology based on inferences. So we take the Bible and infer that means certain things about political affiliation or political position. I mean, politically, and as a partisan member of a party. And we infer those things, and then as we also build our theology based on inference in other areas, but we build it in that so that our patriotism overrules our biblicism. It overrules our discipleship.
Mm.
And so it doesn't matter the candidate's moral compass. Instead, what matters is he's going to politically do the thing that politically, and because it's based on inference, I'm even talking biblically now.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're saying is this candidate is going to give us the judges that we want. And it doesn't matter that those judges may, by and large, may be more to the Roman Catholic wing.
Mm-hmm.
But politically, it lines up with what we have inferred from the Bible that we need to see. And so it all gets an entangled mess.
Mm-hmm.
So I think any Christian that wades into that is just, getting seaweed around their legs. How are you going to go forward in discipleship like you ought to if you're tied up with all of that? That is why Paul doesn't wade into that.
Mm-hmm.
With all the things, when you stop and think that you go from Caesar Augustus, and now when Paul is on the scene in the 50s, then Claudius is the emperor, and he kicks all the Jews out of Rome, and then allows them to come back, and then you have after him you've got Nero, and Nero is okay with Paul to the degree he lets him go the first time.
Right.
I think privately what happens, my reading of history would be, his mother became a Christian, and he himself was very insecure about how many of his centurions and leaders of his army had become followers of Christ.
Right. And
therefore he made a statement, and he killed his mother, he killed his wife. He went crazy.
Right.
And he took Christians and ran a pole through them, dipped them in tar, and used them to light his gardens. I mean, he was making a statement.
Right.
And that's why, he later hunted down Paul to get him the second time, and Paul knew that was all she wrote. But when you think about all of that was happening, and in all of his epistles, Paul says nothing except obey those who are in authority.
Yeah.
And he says nothing except pray for them so that we can have quietness and peace in all godliness and honesty. We're not judging them and measuring them. They're good Romans. I mean, what have we got to criticize them anyway?
Yeah.
This world is not our home, so let's look to our own things. Let Caesar look to his.
So then what's the call? What's the call on, to come back to that perspective that says, Paul was not so concerned with political parties or even how the government might be oppressing him or holding him back. You don't see him speaking about conspiracy theories, right? The only conspiracy he's concerned about is that he writes about is the Antichrist, the one in the future. And so how do we get to a place? And I would bet it has something to do with being a Berean and walking in the Spirit. But what's the call to Christians in terms of coming back to a proper perspective on discipleship?
Well, I'd say on one level, the call is to be a true patriot.
Okay.
So we are all participants in not a democracy, but a representative democracy.
Mm-hmm.
So we complain sometimes, or some in the media or some others complain, perhaps that a candidate is elected to an office that does not win what is called, quote, the popular vote, unquote.
Yeah, right.
But as part of the checks and balances that we are now getting away from, perhaps, we were never designed as a pure democracy, because that could be the tyranny of the majority. And so they said, no, we can't do that. Let's break it down further. So each state votes for the electors, and they will be the representatives of that state to cast the votes for the executive.
Right.
So, okay, let's get back to being true patriots. It ought to be that distant from us. We ought to be to some degree that disinterested, I think. Certainly, any level at which we spend more time or have more emotion over politics than we do over the gospel, we are deflected to our great shame.
Yeah.
And we will never have revival until we pull ourselves out of that. So, okay, go back to being a true patriot and put it all in the context of which it should be. And we can all vote, and we can all have our opinions, and we all have free speech. But the primary way in which our free speech should be exercised is in the gospel.
Yes.
So there is a conspiracy. It's the world, the flesh, and the devil. And it has two wings to make sure that it is as entirely effective as it can be. One wing is that, saying that, okay, the government and big business and the elites, they're all okay. And, okay, that's one way in which the conspiracy gets over. The other way is to say, no, somewhere within these, there are subgroups which either have existed in the past and continue to come to the fore, or they are a product of greed and so forth. And so then that's a conspiracy. Either of those positions, we need to get back to simply saying, no, what it is the world, the flesh, and the devil. And if we're going to be attack on anything, be attack against that. If we're going to get emotional against anything, be against that. But let us be known for faith, love, and hope. And it's not found in a political party or their positions per se. And it is found in getting the gospel to people so that the kingdom of God comes in their heart before the king arrives. Yeah.
Alan, thank you for this conversation. I really appreciate your insight. And I do think it does help me as a citizen of America and as someone who loves America to have a proper perspective. Ultimately, what you said is, we are citizens first and foremost of heaven. We are pilgrims and strangers here. This world is not our home. And so if we function as ambassadors first, and then participants in America second, then I think it does help us to live a more meaningful life.
I'd say don't read from the Bible into politics. Read from the Bible to the gospel. Be gospel-centered in what you're getting out from the Bible and giving to others, and apply it in a gospel way, which puts the matter of being born again first above everything else.
Amen. Well, thanks, brother. I appreciate the time. And I want to thank you as well for joining us for this episode of the Postscript. And if you've got questions about LFBI, or if you've got questions about Living Faith Fellowship, you can find us online, lfbi.org or lffellowship.com. And in both of those places, you can learn about who we are as a fellowship, the connection between our churches, our theological perspective, our approach to God's Word. All of that's there and available to you. But we want to say thank you for joining us, and we hope that today was edifying and beneficial to you. Bye.
I'm the high school pastor at Midtown Baptist Temple, and I'm a student of Living Faith Bible Institute, where I can go to class and know that I'm going to walk away with something that I can use, if not this week, in the future. Sometimes, especially at school, you might be in a class that's going to get you a degree, but it has no application in your life. Well, in LFBI, I know that I'm going to take these classes and it's either going to apply directly to my craft, to my weekly procedures, or it's going to be something in the Word that I'm going to have a student or a counselor who has that question, and now I'm a little more equipped to do the work of the ministry. So I love giving my life every moment I can to young people and to the team I work with, because we are affecting the world. Enroll for classes at lfbi.org. If you are interested in donating to LFBI to support future pastors and leaders, please visit lfbi.org/donate.